Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today I am truly honored to welcome one of the most accomplished and celebrated filmmakers in America. He's best known for writing and directing such memorable films as The Legend of Billy the Kid, Lonely Hearts, Phantom, and last year's cinematic masterpiece, The Last Full Measure. He has worked with everyone from Ridley Scott and Sidney Pollack to John Travolta, Salma Hayek, Ed Harris, Christopher Plummer, Samuel L. Jackson, Laura Dern, and so many more. He is the incomparable screenwriter, director, and producer Todd Robinson. Todd, thank you so much for joining us.
My God, that was quite an introduction. Thank you. Good to be here.
I want to start with Todd Robinson, the writer. Your father was an architect and he designed buildings. You're a screenwriter who designs stories and films. Is that just a coincidence or have you drawn from his experience?
Well, that's actually a really interesting observation. My dad was a mid-century architect. His sweet spot was that sort of wonderful mid-century kind of architecture. He studied with Lou Kahn and Frank Lloyd Wright at Penn. And as a boy, I spent a lot of time with him going to job sites and looking at the bones of buildings. And there was something really powerful about the experience of seeing something that was um, in the midst of being created, something that was becoming, as opposed to a final product. And in the end, when the houses were finished, they were far less interesting to me. And to extrapolate or extend that metaphor, I think that the process of creation, the process of, in my case, writing a screenplay or making a film, is not unlike that process where the thing that fascinates me and the thing that's immediate and in the present is what you're doing. You have an end goal, but in filmmaking, you never really know, although we lie about it constantly. You never really know what a film is going to ultimately be because it changes along the way. And so my dad was an architect. He drew drawings on a drawing board, and I sort of do the same thing with words. I create a blueprint for a film and then execute that plan. So yeah, that's a cool, interesting observation.
You've written movies and you've also written for television. Is there a difference?
Oh yeah, wild differences. I don't even know where to start. My experience in long form, which is really what I probably like to do the best, um, is it's one thing, and the making of a singular movie is just about the time you're gelling as a crew and as a team, it sort of ends.
Mhm.
With television, you really get into a rhythm, and every week you're making half a movie, and there's real benefit to having a crew returning every week and having a stake in it and not looking for their next job. Just from a sort of a practical filmmaking point of view. But then the storytelling is very different too. With a long form narrative piece of filmmaking, you have a beginning, a middle, and end. There's some sort of a transition. Something's happening in the middle that will ultimately be resolved. Whereas in network television anyway, you're sort of feeding a machine, and you're watching characters hopefully change over time, but you're sort of in a way creating the same thing over and over again. It has to every week. You can't really surprise the audience. They're coming to get something that they're familiar with, as opposed to something that's going to surprise them and take them out of that expectation.
Is it fair to assume that you prefer writing for your own projects than writing for other people?
Um, that's a good question. Actually, it depends on the project, and the things that I tend to like to direct tend to be harder, more difficult things to do. They tend to be more personal to me. And so those things, usually I don't usually go out and try to find somebody to do those projects, but I imagine if I did, it would be a little bit more difficult to find somebody because I would have to. When you write for another director, it really is the director's format or form, and so I write a screenplay, and then somebody comes in who's going to reimagine it, and you have to be open to trying to invite them into that process and try to incorporate their interpretation of your work. And unlike in playwriting, in Hollywood anyway, the screenwriter is not that highly regarded in the process, certainly as compared to the director, which I always find perplexing because it really begins with the written word. That's the thing that ultimately lassos the cast. That's the thing that that the money people are going to look to try to create an expectation for financial return. So it really, if it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage, right? I'm far from the first person who said that. But to get back to your point, I don't really prefer one over the other if the director's great. And when they're good, then I'm back at school and I'm learning and trying to, steal everything that I can. So
You've described yourself as a screenwriter who makes non-romantic love stories about men. There's always a personal motivator inside every storyteller. What motivates you in the themes of the stories you tell?
well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I want to think about it too deeply because if you over-examine something, you sort of kill the spontaneity of it. But I would say I know what I tend to write about. And when I say non-romantic love stories between men, I'm usually talking about unrequited relationships between fathers and sons, between brothers on a sport field or a field of sport, or possibly at war. And when men come together, we don't tell stories of initiation about men uh, precisely enough. I think in popular culture, and so if you look at a movie like White Squall, for me, that's all about. It happened to be a true story, so it wasn't deliberately designed to be all about boys mostly, but these boys go on a boat and they return young men, and they're initiated by the disciplines of the sea and through a great trauma, a great tragedy, and then they have to pick up, the paddle, so if you will, and they've got to get themselves out of it, and so those stories attract me. I like the transformational stories, and I just happen to find them in these places like war zones, like sporting situations, like places of work where men are struggling to, and especially in this time, I just think we're in a very interesting time where, over the last 100 years, the role of men and how we identify has really been challenged and changed, and I think we're lost a little bit. And so I think I like that world because I'm trying to figure it out for myself as much as anything else.
Yeah, I think we all are. I want to talk to you now about Todd Robinson, the director. When you direct a movie that you wrote, does Todd the director ever have conflicts with Todd the screenwriter?
Yeah, I always say that first thing I do is I fire the writer the second I take on a directing project. It is truly a love hate relationship at that point because there are always adjustments that have to be made to the screenplay once you're on set or you're preparing to make a movie, and it starts with things as basic as the set that you imagined or the location that you imagined doesn't exist, or it's different than you thought it was going to be, or even better, it offers opportunities that you hadn't thought of. And so all of a sudden you get there and you go, oh my God, this is amazing. I've got to rethink this. I got to readjust that. unfortunately for me, the problem is that I'm the guy that's got to do that, and so I then have to. I tend to be overworked at that point because I really my fantasy is to have a perfect script that I just don't have to deal with anymore, and just start to focus on all of the other elements. And then I find myself back having to write, and of course, there's always editing that is being done on the fly, because you just don't have the time or you don't have the resources, and so then I have to ask myself, well, okay, how do I rewrite the scene to get to the bones of it, the real core of it, what each character needs, what are the very basic tenets of it, what happens if one or the other doesn't get what they want, what outcome might be presented, and those things just have to be done on the page generally. So yeah, so I'm sort of forced to continue to write, but I would prefer not to.
Well, on a movie that you've written, how different is the finished product than what you had envisioned in your head?
That's another really good question. It's often in success, it's better than you imagined, because again, you flex with the opportunities that arise, whether it's something that I mentioned before, a weather change. That all of a sudden, there it is. There's this sun bursting through cloud cover that you never imagined, and you're like, whoa. Or it's something that somebody brings to it. It's an idea that an actor brings. It's an idea that a crew person brings, a production designer, and we're always working within the construct of visual metaphor. So everything that is in the frame ultimately needs to mean something. And to be a director, the interpreter of the text, it's just so much to take on. And so this is why it's really an ensemble effort, because you hire the very best people that you can to try to help you make this as good as it can be. And I try to share these ideas, and to share the responsibility, so that I'm not sitting on anybody, but rather I'm inviting them to. I tell them what I'm trying to go for, what I'm thinking about, and then I say to the production designer, what's the color palette that we need to help reinforce this idea, and then he goes to the wardrobe, the costume designer, and says, listen, this is what color the drapes are going to be. This is what this is going to be. This is the emotional center of the scene. I think that the costume should reflect, the overall concept, and so these things, when you look at a movie and you really pick it apart, all these things have been thought through very carefully. And unless it's just, people who don't understand what they're doing, it's not random. It's deliberate. I recently, I watched it twice. The Queen's Gambit, just a tremendous piece of work. And if you look at how the confluence of the wardrobe with the scene design, it's just phenomenal. I mean, I can't get enough of it. So I'm always trying to share that sort of authorship with all the people working on the film.
Well, that's interesting because you are often referred to as an actor's director because you started out as an actor, but I like to think of you as a writer's director because your passion for the material translates to a very focused vision for the project that you are then conveying to your actors. Is that the most important part of your job, to bring everybody into the world that you've created?
It is. But a director's job or a filmmaker's job changes depending on what phase of the filmmaking you're in. By the time films are made in prep, all these decisions are made. That's why it's so boring to sit on somebody else's set, because at that point, everything has been so carefully thought out. I've discussed the camera movement and the lensing and the lighting with my cinematographer possibly for a year before we ever get there. So at that point, I don't have to talk to he or she. They already know what they're doing. I mean, I might tweak it. I might have a reaction to something if I see something, but generally speaking, they know what they're going to do. The all of the the art people know what they're going to do, and so I get there and I just try to corral it. But my main focus at that point is the actors, and it's really about creating the creative conditions for them to do their best work. It's about uh, creating uh, a sense of confidence in myself and the material, where they're willing to be vulnerable, where they're willing to walk the fence post, knowing that they could fall off and being willing to fall off, but knowing that I'm never really going to allow that to happen. And so when I was younger, I used to share too much with actors. I was excited about, telling them what my overall idea was, and I don't do that anymore. I really just keep it focused on them. Their character is the only thing that they're concerned with. They have to bring, a sense of reality and vulnerability to that. And that's really what I need to focus on the day. Everything, a movie set is a very distracting place. There's 1,000 things going on simultaneously, and it's all very exciting. And for we filmmakers, we don't get to do this often enough. I mean, every couple of years, if I'm lucky, I get to make a movie, and all of a sudden there's gear and there's trucks and there's cranes and there's all this stuff, and you can get swept up in all that, forgetting that the only thing that matters is what happens in the frame, and everything that's happening outside the frame is just a distraction and it's irrelevant. So it's my job to make sure that the set stays quiet, that my actors aren't distracted or in any way, that they really do have the environment to do their very best work.
Are you the kind of director that you would have wanted when you were an actor?
That's so long ago. I don't know. I think of directors like Sidney Lumet, who insisted on, who really came from the theater, which is really where I come from, where there's the possibility of rehearsal. And William Hurt and I talk about this all the time. We lament it together. Uh, because of everybody's schedule, because of the cost of rehearsals, and because, frankly, the money people don't value it. They don't understand the power of rehearsal. And it's not rehearsal isn't about rehearsal is about exploration. It's not about painting yourself into a corner or saying I'm going to do it just like this on the day. It's not about that. It's about creating a certain familiarity with the context of the story, building a character from the physicality of it, and understanding why all those things are there, um, and how that informs the language. And the words, of course, always take care of themselves. You can, Shakespeare is Shakespeare. We're not going to rewrite Mr. Shakespeare. And yet, one version of Hamlet differs wildly from the next. And why is that? It's because of what's really flowing through the actor on that particular performance, or in that particular production. And so I try to, in the case of my last film, people would come in and out of town, and I would have them over to my house. Whoever was available, I would say, "Hey, so and so is going to be here. Let's get everybody over here, and we'll read the script, and we'll read through it out loud, and we'll just talk about it." That was about as close as I came, but it was such a massive ensemble film that it was impossible. Everybody was on different movies, and you can't. I never even had the whole full cast really on the set at the same time.
Wow.
So you really have to try to figure out how to navigate all of those things, and it's difficult, for the poor actor. An actor walks in for 3 days, and their character is going to be spread out throughout the film, but they're going to knock all their work out in 3 or 4 days. They have no idea what the movie's going to look like, or how they're going to fit into it. I'm the only one that really has a sense of that, and so I have to, again, somehow explain that to them and paint that picture for them so that they can somehow get into my head and know, what the rhythms are of what I'm trying to do. So
You strike me as a filmmaker who seems equally comfortable making documentaries like the Amy Cook film and the Marta Beckett film, and also making non-documentary feature films that are based on true stories. So how do you decide whether to make a documentary or a dramatization?
well, I haven't made a documentary in quite a while, although I plan on going back to it at some point. Um, it really all just has to do with the subject matter. Is it attractive to me? Is there something in it for me? Where by exploring somebody's life, I might learn something about myself without sounding too self-indulgent about it. I mean, that's really what we're doing. All of our work is somehow a reflection of ourselves. We're looking into a mirror, and so that's really, and a lot of it's unconscious, and I'm aware that it's unconscious because oftentimes when I get an idea for a film or a doc or whatever, I know that I'm excited about it. I know that it's triggered something in me, but I don't know exactly what that is. You mentioned Marta Beckett. That film was called Amargosa, and it was about this sort of kooky woman living in Death Valley Junction in the middle of the desert who discovered this sort of auditorium that she turned into what she called an opera house and painted the walls and ceilings like the Sistine Chapel and began to perform there as a woman well into her midlife as a ballerina in toe shoes. And it's a little sort of kooky Americana, and yet the power of what she was doing was if you build it, they will come. So she was an artistic entrepreneur. And in the beginning, she was performing for 2 or 3 people. In the end, she was, they were bussing them in from Las Vegas to see her show. And for me, in the end, and it's about a lot of other things too, but to me, it's about feeling isolated as an artist, as a creative person. And it's about having the courage to do something, whether there's financial reward or not, which is the question that we always have to ask ourselves. Why am I really doing this? Am I doing this for, personal glory, or am I doing it to try to grow and share something to an audience that will, let me put it this way, audiences tend to to discover films. And while we try to make films for mass audiences, if you're doing drama, which is what I do, they tend to trigger the people that they trigger, and those people will find their way to it, and that's your audience for that film. And you have to be content with that. And Marta was content with the people who came to see her. And it's a little bit of the Kevin Costner movie,
Field of
one
Dreams.
of my favorite films. I cry every time at the end.
Me too.
Speaking of love stories between men, that one is a great example of that. But if you build it, they will come, right? So Marta Beckett built it, and they came, and I guess I apply that same standard to myself. I just keep trying to build them, and hope that they'll come.
Well, in 1995, you built it and I went. You won a National Board of Review Award for Best Documentary for Wild Bill, Hollywood Maverick, which was about legendary director William Wellman. He directed some of my favorite movies like Wings, Beau Geste, the original A Star is Born, The Story of G.I. Joe. What inspired you to make that documentary?
Well, that was really because I knew his granddaughter, Kathy Wellman, and she was a very good friend to my wife and I, and she at the time was dating a good friend of mine, and I didn't know who the hell William Wellman was. I didn't know who he was. William Wellman, Wilder, they all kind of blurred for me. And she would tell me these stories about her famous director, golden age of Hollywood grandfather. And I was a little bit ashamed because I knew a lot of the movies, or at least I knew them by name. And she introduced me to her dad, William Wellman Jr., who is an absolute repository of all things his father. And I immediately became fascinated by it, and it just as a, as a point of interest, began looking at the films. Angels with Dirty Faces, the Jimmy Cagney movies that he made. He made gangster movies. He made war movies. He made love stories. He made slapstick comedies. He did everything, and I think he made close to 75 films in a 30-year career, which means if you do the math, I think it's close to 5 pictures a year, which is just unheard of today. But he was a studio guy. They assigned it to him. In those days, you kind of cut in the camera, so there weren't a whole lot of subjective decisions to make later. And he was just so efficient, and he was also an incredible kooky personality. This guy, he was just a true two-fisted. He fought with all the studio heads, and I just loved that because it seemed like he won most of the time. So anyway, I became interested in it, and then we made it back in, a long time ago now, 1996, and a lot of the people that he had worked for in the second half of his career were still alive. And so I got to interview, many, many Hollywood luminaries. And so that was incredible to meet my heroes. I mean, I interviewed Sidney Poitier and Gregory Peck in his home, and Burgess Meredith. I think I got the last interview with him. Robert Mitchum. I mean, it just Nancy Reagan. That was amazing. I met the president of the United States after he had just left office and was beginning to struggle with Alzheimer's, and it was incredible. All these films really sort of become the soundtrack of your professional life, and that one was very memorable.
I loved it, and now I love it even more because I've heard the backstory. When I finished it, I wondered, who are the other directors that have inspired you?
Oh, there's so many. I would say, in my life, the people, I mean, you look at the great films and, the films that you love, of course, and I could go back and talk about people like, you know, George Cukor and, all of them. But in my life, the people that most closely influenced me, first of all, was Ridley Scott, because I got to sit next to him at the camera for an entire movie. Sidney Pollack was another person who was just so thoughtful and patient and really, really smart. And so to listen to people like that, Peter Masterson is another who directed another one of my films. So to hear people like that talk about your work and bring it to life, and make it better than you could have possibly imagined, really, you know, influenced me. Watching the way Ridley shot with multiple cameras, the way he interfaced with actors, what he said, and more to the point, what he didn't say. Sidney, it was more of a Socratic dialogue all the time. He was just never satisfied with the answer. He was always trying to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And then you get to a certain point where you need to let all that go and make sure that the actors forget all of that and just, okay, now we're just going to be here in this moment and see what happens. And so filmmaking, unlike a play, is much more experimental in a way. You have the text, that's true, but everything else is unpredictable. And I also got to see people like that who are really bright and understand the process, hope and pray and anticipate the mistakes, because those spontaneous moments are the things that just elevate filmmaking from what you think to, just sort of the movie gods sprinkle fairy dust on it, and things happen. And that's happened to me a couple of times. And when it happens, you can't believe it, because it's beyond you. You can't take credit for it. So,
Well, you've made magic happen a few times, and one time I'd like to ask you about. In 2000, you and David Crosby made one of my favorite documentaries, a powerful film called Stand and Be Counted, which explores the role that musicians have played in social and political activism through their music. You had everybody in that movie, from Berry Gordy to Arlo Guthrie, Sting, Bono, Harry Belafonte, Joan Baez, Elton John, so many others. There's such great footage. That must have been an amazing experience to put that movie together.
It was amazing, but it was rock and roll. And rock and roll and film do not really love each other.
Why?
Oh, because there are a lot of reasons. The main one is schedule. Musicians that are performing, that are out, playing big venues, big gigs, and we toured with a lot of them. I mean, I was out with CSN and others. We played big venues, big music festivals, and all kinds of massive, performances. And first of all, the artists are getting this crazy feedback that you can't even imagine unless you're standing on stage and feeling a stadium full of people, below this energy at you. It's incredible. And, you're talking to them before the show, and yeah, man, it's just like, she's just another dude, and then you watch them get that kind of feedback and they walk off stage and say, so what were we talking about? You realize there's no way you can be right. I mean, they just got this like incredible feedback, and I'm just like, yeah, forget it. But there's that, and then of course they come off stage, and then there's usually some form of an after party, or something, some green room kind of vibe, and then they go home and they're all jacked up, and maybe we're getting on a bus and going to the next town, which means you're sleeping on a bus. But they tend to not even wake up until 11 or 1 the next day. And then they're just on a different clock. And with film, I got a 10 or 12 hour day that I'm paying people for. And if I'm not shooting, I'm just burning money and I'm not getting anything for it. And that film was super challenging that way to get people to show up. I had a gigantic star who I will not name stand me up 2 or 3 times in this house, and but he's such a gigantic star that I almost thought it was kind of great, that he didn't make it. But other people were phenomenal. Like Sting couldn't have been more human and accessible. Joan Baez, I just, I fell in love with her. Sean Colvin, and just many. Elton John even was very accessible, because at that time, he this is again, 20 years ago, but he was so involved in his AIDS philanthropy at that time, and so he was very giving of his time to us, because he understood that we could help market something that was very important to him. Yeah, man, that was truly a circus, that show.
It's ironic that you had that experience, because as an audience member, you made those people, those artists, be more human.
Well, they're just being themselves, in the end, but it's hurting kittens.
I can imagine.
And each one of them also, because their schedules are so tight, they have a whole entourage of people around them that are managing their time and making sure that they get where they're supposed to get. And, they have contractual obligations and television appearances and you name it. And they sort of squeeze a little documentary crew in between all the real stuff that they're doing. So yeah, it was amazing.
It was a very unique film. And then you co-produced in 2016 a documentary that's very close to my heart, entitled The Freedom to Marry, which tracks the evolution of the same-sex marriage movement from its beginnings all the way to the Supreme Court victory. That movie resonated with me very deeply, and everyone in the LGBTQ community, and I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for your involvement in it.
Well, I appreciate you thanking me. That film really entirely belongs to Eddie Rosenstein, the director and creator of it, who happens to be one of my best friends and a very dear friend of my producing partner, Sidney Sherman. And when he began that process, we just said to him, "What can we do to help?" And we tried to help him raise money, um, and we're supportive in post production. Looking at cuts and trying to help him formulate the story, because that was a true cinema verite story where we did not know what the outcome was going to be, because it all hinged on the Supreme Court decision in the end. So, but Eddie is, if you haven't seen his films, Eddie Rosenstein, he's I think one of the finest, our finest American documentary filmmakers that not that many people know about, and his films are all gems. And that one in particular, he really embraced not only the community, but it was personal to him, because the leading man in the story, the attorney who really took it upon his shoulders 30 years earlier, was actually a childhood friend of his. And Eddie's mom and his mom were and still are good friends. And so it was really a neighborhood story about Pittsburgh in a way. And so I just wanted to support Eddie and the community that I owe so much to, because I don't tell anybody, but I started out as a dancer, and when I was in acting school, I was a tap and ballet and jazz guy, and so I constantly interacted with the gay and lesbian community, just because that's who's in the arts. And I'm old enough that I also went through the AIDS epidemic and watched some very good friends live shortened lives. And I just think in my lifetime, that community has gone through some really difficult trials, and to have even a small part in trying to right the ship, I'm grateful that there was a small space for me in that effort.
Well, it mattered a lot to me and to all your fans. I now want to ask you about your 2013 film Phantom. This is the true story of a Russian submarine captain with a checkered history, played by Ed Harris, who was sent on a secret mission as part of an experimental process led by secret agent David Duchovny. I want to ask you first about the atmosphere you created of the close quarters in the submarine. The lighting was dim all the way through it, which is very different from the bright lighting in The Hunt for Red October, for example, another submarine movie. I thought you used lighting really effectively in this movie to convey the claustrophobia and also to give a sense of foreboding.
Well, that's a good example of that relationship I spoke with earlier, between myself and a cinematographer. Byron Werner shot that movie for me, and we shot it. I think we're the only film to ever actually shoot a feature film in an actual submarine. That was not a set; it was a real submarine. And so the claustrophobic parts of it were, we didn't have to do much. It was just real. It was a real Russian submarine, and we were at a moment in technologically in time where we were transitioning from film, or we had transitioned from film to digital video, and the cameras have gotten smaller and smaller. I think we're about to the point where they're not going to get a whole lot smaller, but because you still have to have the lens, and that sort of limits the size. But in that small space, we were able to take the cameras and break them down and get them small and hang them on bungee cords and use that to steady the camera and so forth. And the lighting were my first working with LED lighting, because had we used generally traditional incandescent types of lighting, it would have heated up that submarine, and it wouldn't have been possible to work in it. But the LEDs don't create any heat, and so we just sort of hid these very small lights behind the gack in the ceiling and all over the place, and it was deliberate and designed. But what I said to the actors in that film was, I said, if you want to be in the movie, find a pool of light and stand in it. And you need to, it's kind of a theater thing. You need to find the light and feel it on you and know that you're, creating an exposure, because if you stand in the shadow, we're not going to see you. And so it was interesting that way, that the lighting actually drove the blocking to some extent. So yeah, that was a really interesting film to make.
Can I also mention the scene in the Russian Orthodox Church? That was a spectacular interior that really contrasted with the submarine scenes. Your set designer did an amazing job in that movie.
Well, I think the location people did a spectacular job in terms of that, because that's an actual Russian Orthodox church in San Diego, and yeah, this is all about existential struggles in terms of what people believe, and so this man who is sort of agnostic is forced to go in there and, on behalf of one of his crewmen, sort of bless a union that's doomed, a wedding that's doomed, and the preacher, I guess you would call him. What do you call? I guess he's what is a Russian Orthodox priest? I guess he's a priest, right?
Yeah, priest.
He asks him some very direct questions that are Socratic in nature, that sort of haunt him throughout the story. And so we wanted him, Ed Harris, surrounded by all of that sort of Gothic sort of feeling.
I can't leave this discussion of Phantom, Todd, without mentioning the David Duchovny character, who played a psychopathic Russian agent. His sinister character is clearly motivated by a misplaced fear that the United States will launch a nuclear attack. He had to exude great intelligence and strategic thinking, but with an evil persona. How did you convey to the actor the tone of the characterization that you wanted from him?
Well, that's really sort of a fascinating observation. So the thing was, this was actually based on a true event about a submarine called the K-129, which was a Russian submarine that indeed, it appears, attempted to launch a nuclear missile at Pearl Harbor back in the 1960s. And somewhere along the way, something went wrong. Either the fail-safe device was detonated it, or they just had some sort of a failure, but it sank the submarine. And the United States government went in and, with the help of Howard Hughes, who created this ship called the Glomar Explorer, went back in and actually scooped that submarine up in order to, pick up all of the possible intelligence aboard. But what you said is true, or the question is, why would they attempt to launch? And the point was that it was a false flag operation where the Russians were trying to, or I should say, aspects of the Russian government were trying to start a war between the United States and China. Because, as Ed Harris says in the film, the only nuclear war you can survive is one that you're not in. So they were trying to, do this false flag operation. And David Duchovny plays one of the Stasnes officers who is embedded on the submarine, and tries to take over the submarine, and in fact does. What's interesting from an actor-director point of view is that characters don't think that they're wrong. They don't think that they're evil. They think that they're right, that they're righteous. He's got a political or social reason for doing what he's doing that he truly believes in, and so that became the debate in the movie: who is right, and what if he's wrong? See, they thought that the United States during the Cold War was about to launch on Russia, and they were terrified. And Ken Sewell, in speaking to his Russian counterparts many decades later, said, well, why would you ever think that we would launch if we had first strike capability? Why would we ever launch and start World War III? And the Russians turned to him and they just kind of shrugged and said, well, we would. And so, coming from their point of view, it seemed fully logical that that the United States, might be the aggressor. And so the best answer to that was to not get in a scrape with us, but rather have somebody else do that dirty work. And so David's character truly believes that. And as the actor, he took that belief on, and so began the conversation.
It was a remarkable performance. Todd, I want to move on now to the movie that, in my opinion, was the best film of the past few years, The Last Full Measure. This is another true story about airman medic William Pitzenbarger Jr., who died saving a company of wounded soldiers during the Vietnam War. It took 33 years after his death to finally award him the Congressional Medal of Honor. What a powerful, emotional, impactful movie. Todd, I just loved it.
Yeah, it was a passion project. Not only did it take 33 years for his brother soldiers to get him the medal, but it also took Sidney Sherman and myself and Julian Adams another 20 years to get the movie made. But it was worth it. We became so connected with these veterans who had just gone through this traumatic battle that we became friends with them, and we just really, felt like we owed it to them to tell their story. And so we are grateful to my executive producer Mark Damon, who put all the financing together and made it happen finally.
How did you find out about the story?
I found out the story because years earlier I was working on another movie for Wolfgang Peterson about pararescue, which is what William Pitzenbarger did, which is sort of like super high octane paramedic work. And I was adapting a book, and I was touring the country, going to all of the training facilities, and every place that I went, the young soldiers really, or the young airmen, I should say, really wanted to make sure that I knew the story of William Pitzenbarger, because he's really their sort of patron saint. And I listened to the story over and over again, and I thought it was amazing. I had learned that they were in the process of trying to secure the Medal of Honor for him, and I was sort of a fanboy. I was a fan of the story, and I wanted to see it happen. But I was already busy with another film on the subject, and I wasn't thinking of it in terms of a film. And then after a whole year of doing research, I ended up at Kirtland Air Force Base to see the graduation of this class that I had been following around. And they had invited Mr. Pitzenbarger to attend. And he gave some remarks. And in the midst of that, he lamented some of the things that he'd never gotten to do with his son or see his son do. And one of them was that he'd never gotten to see his son have a child of his own, because only then could he fully appreciate how much his father loved him. And that just struck me like a lightning bolt. And I flashed back to my own experience with my dad, and his concern about me going to the Vietnam War, even though I was probably too young to really go. But the way that war was going, and this last one that we've been in, or these last ones have lasted almost 20 years. So my son was just a little boy at that time, and so it all sort of congealed for me, and I understood. I had empathy for Mr. Pitzenbarger, having lost a child, and it was in that moment that I thought, well, this is a really excellent reason to make this film and tell this story.
In the movie, it seemed clear to me that many of the veterans and survivors of that mission were not eager to talk about it. How difficult was it to get them to open up and explain how such a travesty of justice could have occurred?
The ones that really didn't want to talk about it, I never really got to talk to. And there were a few of them, a handful, that it was too traumatic for them, and they just never came forward. But for the others, they were so passionate about, first of all, there was a time clock on the original getting of them, or trying to achieve the medal, because Mr. Pitzenbarger was dying of cancer. And so they knew that there was a clock on that. and and then we started losing these veterans because they're anywhere from their late 60s now into their 90s, depending on where they were in their military careers. And so we just kept trying over and over to set the movie up, and it had been set up multiple times, and for one reason or another, it would fall apart. But we had, I foolishly made this promise that I was going to get this movie made, never thinking it would take this long. But we just became again so committed to them and their commitment to Mrs. Pitzenbarger and the family that we just stuck with it, and fortunately we're finally able to get it done.
Was the Air Force cooperative or supportive in giving you the information you needed?
Oh yeah, yeah. The Air Force was the entire military, the United States government. Everybody saw the merit in doing it, and so yeah, we had the help of Whitten Peters, who was the former Secretary of the Air Force, helping us daily push things through.
Todd, you worked with Ed Harris in Phantom and in The Last Full Measure. This guy is a veteran actor. He's played many iconic roles in Apollo 13, The Right Stuff, Pollack, The Truman Show. The list goes on and on. What's it like to direct somebody of that vintage? Does he even need much direction?
No. And that's the again, it's cliche, but it's true. I mean, 99% of great directing is great casting, and I had such a ridiculous cast to work with. Again, with Ed, I have a shorthand with Ed because we're friends, and I've known him for many years, and I can just give him a little bit of an adjustment, and he'll get it right away, and he'll just go, got it, and he'll try it. But usually, you just tee these guys up, and they're such good listeners. It's it's just, I'm just full of cliches today, but Ed is such a tremendous listener. And I remember Sebastian Stan coming up to me after a scene with Ed, and I forget, I think we were shooting Ed's side, and we were resetting the room, and Sebastian came up to me and he says, man, I don't know if this guy's going to kiss me or punch me in the face. And I said, exactly. And the reason is because, my old teacher, Daryl Hickman, used to say, about actors, you want to be out of control but in command. And that is the way that a lot of these guys work, and Ed is no exception. Ed doesn't know what he's going to do next. He knows his lines, he knows where he's going to step, he knows what he's going to do, but he is so intent on absorbing what's coming from the other actor and reacting to it in a completely natural way that he doesn't know what he's going to do next. And I think if you look at De Niro's early work, he was the same way. You're always, is that guy going to come at me? Like, you just don't know, and it creates such amazing tension. And I was so pleased that Sebastian, noticed that and remarked on it, because it was such a great lesson for him as a young actor, to notice that and go, what is he doing that is making me feel something real? I really feel threatened. And I'm going, yeah, and I'm rolling a camera on that. So now I know something real is happening. It really is. And a lot of time, actors are pretending they're playing at something, but the energy between two people is real. How do I feel about you right now? I'm feeling something. And that energy changes from instant to instant. And if you just sort of let go of all the sort of conventions and get that little guy off your shoulder who's editing the movie while you're trying to act, and get that out of the way. And when I talk about creating the conditions for good work, that's what I'm talking about. I don't want them feeling insecure so that they're, watching themselves work. I just want them to be present and take this gigantic energy that these, really powerful, gifted actors come with, and the willingness to push that through the structure of the words and the blocking and all of that.
Yeah, that's really fascinating because when I watch Ed Harris in any of his movies, you can't really find him acting. You never see him acting.
Yeah. You don't catch him acting. Yeah.
Right. Well, before we leave our discussion of The Last Full Measure, I want to point out that you sit on the board of the Save a Warrior Foundation, which provides services to veterans, active duty service members, and first responders dealing with post traumatic stress disorder to prevent suicide. I just want to tell you, I think that is remarkable, and I commend you for your efforts in helping such a worthy cause.
Well, thank you. That is the brainchild of Jake Clark, who's the founder. And it is remarkable work. It is, in some ways, the most meaningful thing I've ever done as a human walking the planet. When you see people in pain and trouble and realize that there is an immediate remedy to help get them out of that dark place. Uh, it's the most incredible thing to see happen. And I went through it myself. In order to become really part of the team, they required me to do it myself, and it was absolutely terrifying, and it changed my life. And
Well,
if anybody is out there listening who is a first responder, a former police officer, a military person, or just has is having a dark time and think that they might hurt themselves, all you have to do is go to www.saveawarrior.org and just check out the web page and fill out the application, and somebody will call you within a few hours. And there's no cost, by the way, to anyone who attends. It's all funded. So
I urge everybody to go to saveawarrior.org and find out more about this very, very important organization. When you're not making movies, I'm told you teach at the USC School of Cinematic Arts. Now, I know enough about teaching to know you're not doing it for the money. So, what does teaching bring to you?
well, I always and still crave mentorship. I would love somebody to, see the potential in me and try to grow it, try to fertilize it, try to make it better. And so I feel that as part of, my legacy, if you want to call it that, my sharing what I already know with young people, so that they might benefit from all the mistakes that I've made, or some of the mistakes that I've made, and some of the knowledge that I've gained along the way, is very fulfilling. And it's sort of, in a way, makes you a little bit immortal. If somebody is going to remember something that you said in a class, or remember that you showed kindness or support for them when they were not feeling so secure about what they were doing, and then they go on, and whether it's in the movies or not, I always say that my classes are life classes disguised as cinema classes, because I don't really care if they become filmmakers or not, except to the extent that they care. What I care about is that they learn how to work as a group, play well with others, and show empathy for their fellow, humans who walk the planet with them. That's really what's most important to me. And in our business, it's just so driven by dysfunctional, broken, wounded people that sometimes you can really get caught up in a lot of nastiness. And so I want to encourage them to find their people, find supportive people in their own age group that are going to carry them through their careers. And then I'm just always around if they need something or have a question. I get emails all the time and phone calls, and I'm happy to do that.
Those students are so lucky. Todd, I have to tell you, getting to interview you has been a magical experience for me. I'm a huge fan of your work. I so appreciate you taking the time to come on our show. Thank you, Todd, so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I hope you'll come back to our show with every new project because you're always welcome.
All you have to do is ask.
Our guest has been the brilliant writer, director, and producer Todd Robinson. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Remember to subscribe to the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. And be sure to check out more great interviews with Harvey Brownstone on harveybrownstoneInterviews.com.